The three words hung in the air of their pristine, white marble kitchen, seeming to stain the impossibly clean surfaces. "I'm bankrupt, Isabella." Julian watched his wife's face, a face he had once considered the most beautiful architectural structure he had ever known. He had studied its lines, its curves, the way light fell upon the high planes of her cheekbones for 10 years. Now, for the first time, he was seeing the raw materials beneath the facade. There was no immediate cascade of tears, no rush to his side, no comforting hand on his arm. Instead, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together, not in concern, but in a micro-expression of complex calculation. The initial shock was immediately replaced by a chilling stillness. Her gaze flickered, almost imperceptibly, past him, towards the sub-zero refrigerator, the Gaggenau oven, the view of the infinity pool that bled into the distant city lights. "What do you mean, bankrupt?" she asked. Her voice was level, stripped of its usual melodic warmth. It was the voice she used with incompetent contractors or a waiter who brought the wrong vintage. "The firm is gone," Julian said, keeping his own voice deliberately soft, tinged with a carefully crafted note of defeat. "A series of bad investments, a project that collapsed. It's all gone. The house, the cars, everything." Isabella didn't move. She stood by the quartz island, her hand resting near a bowl of decorative, unblemished green apples. He saw her knuckles whiten against the polished stone. She thought he was a failure, a fool who had built a kingdom of glass and then dropped it. She thought her life, the one she curated with such meticulous, ruthless precision, was over. What she didn't know was that the kingdom was not made of glass, but of diamond. And he, the man she was already beginning to dismiss, still held it in the palm of his hand. This moment, this cold, sterile moment in their temple of wealth, was not an ending. It was the beginning of a meticulously planned demolition. Within 1 week, the life she knew would be rubble, but the foundation of his would be revealed, stronger than she could ever imagine. This story is about the cavernous divide between perception and reality, and the devastating consequences of underestimating the quiet man in the room. We're about to go on a journey, and I'm so glad to have you with us. If you enjoy stories about justice and hidden strength, I hope you'll consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to Julian and the test he had just set in motion. Their life, until that very morning, had been a portrait of success. Julian was a respected, if not famously flashy architect. His firm, Vantage Point Designs, had a reputation for elegant, minimalist structures that harmonized with their environment. Isabella was, for all intents and purposes, a professional socialite. Her days were a whirlwind of charity luncheons, gallery openings, and maintaining their home as a showpiece for the lifestyle magazines that frequently featured it. Julian had always believed they were a team. He built the world, and she perfected it. He saw her ambition for social standing not as a flaw, but as a different kind of creative drive. He had loved her for her glittering energy, for the way she made their life feel like a grand, important event. He remembered proposing to her on a balcony in Lake Como, the lights of Bellagio twinkling below. She had wept, her tears seeming as pure as the diamond he slipped on her finger. "Always, Julian," she had whispered, "in wealth and in poverty, in brilliance and in struggle. Always." The words echoed in his mind now, a hollow, mocking refrain. He had built his life around that promise, believing it to be as solid as the foundations he laid for his buildings. But over the past few years, hairline cracks had begun to appear. Small moments of dismissiveness when a project was delayed. A subtle impatience when he spoke of his work, his passion, which she began to treat as a mere means to an end. The end being a new Birkin bag or a summer rental in the Hamptons. He had ignored them, plastering over the cracks with gifts and reassurances, telling himself that this was the natural stress of a high-pressure life. The decision to set this test in motion had come to him 3 months prior. He had just finalized the secret sale of a revolutionary architectural software he had been developing for years. A sale that had netted him a fortune far beyond anything his firm could have generated in a lifetime. He was, for the first time, unassailably wealthy. He came home that night, the contract a tangible weight in his briefcase, his heart soaring with the desire to share the news with his wife. He imagined them celebrating, planning a new future, one free from any financial pressure. He found her on the phone in their walk-in closet, surrounded by a king's ransom in designer clothes and accessories. She was speaking to her sister Chloe. "Honestly, I don't know how much longer he can keep this up," she'd said, her voice dripping with a casual, bored contempt. "The firm is so boutique. Marcus says he needs to be more aggressive. If he doesn't land that museum contract, we might have to sell the place in Aspen." Julian had stopped, hidden in the doorway. He listened as she complained about him, not as a husband, but as a financial instrument that was underperforming. There was no mention of his talent, his passion, his late nights at the office. There was only a cold accounting of his earning potential. The love he thought was the bedrock of their marriage was, he realized with a sickening lurch, just a line item on her personal balance sheet. That night, he didn't mention the sale. He placed the contract, the proof of his true worth, into a safe deposit box. And he began to plan. He would not just leave. That was too simple. He needed to know the truth, the absolute, unvarnished truth of the woman he had married. He needed to see what she was made of when the gilding was stripped away. So he constructed this final, elaborate test. He built a fiction of failure, a carefully designed ruin, and invited her to live in it with him. Her reaction in this kitchen was the first structural analysis, and the results were already chillingly clear. The facade was crumbling, and the foundation was rotten. The change in Isabella was not gradual. It was immediate and absolute, as if a switch had been flipped. The warmth that had, even in recent years, been her default public setting vanished completely. The woman who would greet him with a kiss, her hand tracing the line of his jaw, now barely looked at him when he entered a room. That first evening, after his confession, the silence in their cavernous home was heavier than any argument could ever have been. Julian sat in his custom-designed leather armchair, a book open on his lap, though he wasn't reading. He was observing. Isabella moved through the space with a frantic, brittle energy. She was on her phone constantly, her voice a low, urgent murmur. She canceled their dinner reservation at a Michelin-starred restaurant for the following night. "Something has come up," he heard her say, her tone clipped. "No, nothing to worry about, just a change of plans." She didn't consult him. She didn't ask if he still wanted to go. The "we" of their marriage had become "I" in a matter of hours. Later that evening, she approached him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I've canceled the caterers for Saturday's gala pre-party," she announced. "We can't possibly afford to host 60 people right now." "Of course," Julian said, his voice calm and even. "That's a sensible decision." He was testing her response. Would she offer a kinder alternative? A smaller get-together? A simple, "we'll get through this"? She offered none. "Sensible," she scoffed, the word a small, sharp dart. "It's humiliating, Julian. That's what it is. Do you know how this will look? I've been planning this for months. Everyone who matters is coming." "The people who matter will understand," he replied softly, watching her. "Understand what? That my husband is incompetent?" The word landed with deliberate cruelty. It was the first direct blow. Julian felt a flicker of the old, raw hurt, but he pushed it down. This was data. This was evidence. He needed to remain an objective observer of his own life's demolition. Inside the pocket of his trousers, his fingers found the cool, smooth metal of a small, nondescript USB drive. It was his symbolic object, a talisman of the truth. On it was a single, encrypted file, the final executed contract for the sale of his software company, arch-innovate for $150 million. Touching it was a reminder that this humiliation was a choice, a temporary state he was inhabiting for a greater purpose. It was the key to his hidden kingdom. Isabella didn't notice the gesture. She was too consumed by her own spiraling panic and fury. "I need to call my father," she said, as if Julian were no longer part of the equation. She walked out onto the terrace, pulling the glass door shut with a sharp click that felt like a final punctuation mark. Julian remained in his chair, the silence of the house pressing in on him. He could see her silhouette against the glittering skyline, her posture rigid, her gestures sharp and angry as she spoke into the phone. He didn't need to hear the words. He knew what she was saying. She was reporting his failure to the man who had always suspected it was inevitable. Her father, Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a man built of old money and older prejudices. A real estate tycoon who had inherited his empire, he viewed Julian's new money, earned through talent and hard work, as flimsy and unsubstantial. He had tolerated Julian because Isabella had chosen him, and because Julian's success, however distasteful its source, had at least funded the lifestyle Marcus believed his daughter deserved. Now, with that success apparently gone, the flimsy tolerance would evaporate. Marcus would see his initial judgment confirmed, and he would not be gracious about it. Julian leaned his head back, closing his eyes. He wasn't just testing Isabella, he was testing the entire ecosystem of her world, a world built on the shifting sands of status and appearance. He had always felt like an outsider in that world, accepted on condition of his performance. Now he had deliberately failed to perform, and he was about to see the consequences. The pain was real, a dull ache in his chest where his love for her used to reside. But beneath the pain, a colder, harder emotion was beginning to form. Resolve. He had designed buildings to withstand earthquakes and hurricanes. He would withstand this. He would let the storm rage, let it strip away every lie, every pretense, until only the truth remained, standing stark and undeniable in the rubble. He opened his eyes and looked at his wife's frantic silhouette on the terrace. The demolition was proceeding exactly as planned. The first cracks were already showing, and the whole rotten structure was beginning to groan under the pressure. The following days were an exercise in controlled humiliation. Isabella treated Julian with a contempt that was both theatrical and deeply personal. She spoke to him only to issue instructions or ask logistical questions about the disaster, as she now called it. "Have you called the bank? What are they saying? Are they taking the cars first or the art?" Her questions weren't born of a desire to help, but of a morbid need to catalog her own losses. Julian answered each one with a quiet, maddening calm, providing vague but plausible details of his fictional collapse. He was a master architect, and this story was his most complex design yet, complete with stress points in load-bearing lies. The true test, the first major escalation, came that Friday, a dinner at her parents' estate. It was a weekly tradition that Julian had always found taxing, but now he approached it with the grim focus of a general heading into a pivotal battle. The Thorne estate was a monument to Marcus's ego, a sprawling neo-Georgian mansion that shouted its wealth from every cornice and balustrade. It was a house designed to intimidate, to remind visitors of their place. From the moment they arrived, the atmosphere was thick with condescension. Marcus Thorne greeted Julian not with a handshake, but with a heavy, patronizing hand on his shoulder. "Julian, I heard about your spot of trouble," he said, his voice a low rumble of feigned sympathy. "Tough break. The market is unforgiving." He steered Julian towards the cavernous living room, where Isabella's mother, Eleanor, sat perched on a silk sofa, her face a mask of polite horror. "Julian, dear," Eleanor said, extending 2 fingers for him to shake. "We are just so worried. For Isabella, of course. This must be terribly difficult for her." The message was clear. Julian's difficulty was irrelevant. He was the cause of the problem. Isabella was the victim. Isabella, who had now taken her place beside her mother, accepted the role with practiced grace. She looked fragile, wounded, a tragic heroine in a drama of her own making. Julian watched her, a strange sense of detachment washing over him. He was watching a performance, and a very good one at that. Dinner was served in a formal dining room that could have seated 30. The four of them sat at one end of a vast mahogany table, the distance between them feeling both physical and symbolic. The conversation was a masterclass in passive aggression, led by Marcus. "You know, Julian," Marcus began, swirling the blood-red wine in his crystal glass, "I always said your sector was volatile, all ideas and concepts, not like brick and mortar. You can't touch a blueprint, you can touch a skyscraper." He took a smug sip of wine. "That's real value." "The museum project," Isabella chimed in, her voice carrying a sharp edge of accusation. "You were so certain about it. You told me it was a sure thing." "No project is a sure thing until the contracts are signed," Julian replied evenly, cutting his filet mignon with surgical precision. "There were unforeseen complications." "Unforeseen complications," Marcus repeated, savoring the phrase as if it were a delicious morsel of food. "That's what they all say. The fact is you overextended. You flew too close to the sun, my boy. Your generation always does. You think a fancy degree and a few clever designs are a substitute for real-world business acumen." Every word was a carefully aimed stone. They were building a narrative, the story of Julian's inevitable failure, and they were casting him as the arrogant fool. He let them. He ate his dinner, listened patiently, and nodded at the appropriate times. He was a silent confessor, absorbing their sins of pride and arrogance. With each insult, he felt his emotional connection to this family, to his wife, dissolving. He was no longer a son-in-law or a husband. He was an anthropologist studying a strange, cold-blooded tribe. "So, what's the plan?" Marcus demanded, leaning forward, the patriarch asserting his authority. "You can't expect to keep Isabella in this state. She has a certain standard of living to maintain." "My first priority is to manage the liquidation and see what can be salvaged," Julian said, reciting the lines he had prepared. Isabella let out a short, bitter laugh. "Salvaged? Julian, there's nothing to salvage. You told me it was all gone." She turned to her father, her voice trembling with practiced despair. "Daddy, he's lost everything. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. The savings, gone." Julian mentally cataloged the lies. The house was owned outright by his trust. Their joint savings account, which held a respectable but not life-altering sum, was indeed low because he had stopped replenishing it from his personal accounts 3 months ago. The vast majority of his fortune was untouchable, invisible, a vast subterranean ocean of wealth beneath the parched desert of his supposed bankruptcy. "Don't you worry, my darling," Marcus said, reaching across the table to pat Isabella's hand. "Your mother and I will take care of you. You can always come home." The offer was not extended to Julian. He was to be cut loose, a failed investment to be written off. Julian looked at his wife, seeking a flicker of protest, a single word in his defense. "He's my husband, Dad. We'll face this together." The words did not come. Isabella simply nodded, her eyes filling with tears of self-pity. In that moment, Julian knew his marriage was not just broken. It had been an illusion from the start. He had not been a partner, but a provider. And now that his function was seemingly obsolete, so was he. He finished his wine, the expensive vintage tasting like ash in his mouth. He placed his napkin on the table, a quiet, final gesture. The humiliation was now complete. The data he needed had been gathered. All that was left was to hear the final, unvarnished verdict, the one she would deliver when she thought he couldn't hear. The breaking point, the moment that vaporized the last vestiges of Julian's hope, came 2 nights later. It was the quiet bomb that leveled the emotional landscape of his heart, leaving behind nothing but the cold, hard certainty of what he had to do. He had retreated into his home office, a space he had designed as his sanctuary, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a large oak desk overlooking the darkened garden. He was ostensibly going over papers, a performance of despair he had been maintaining for Isabella's benefit. In reality, he was drafting an email to his legal team, outlining the final steps of his strategy. Isabella was in their bedroom, and he could hear the low murmur of her voice. He had assumed she was talking to one of her society friends, cataloging her woes for a sympathetic ear. But as he stood up to stretch, the sound became clearer through the slightly ajar office door. She was on the phone with her sister, Chloe. Her voice was different from the one she used with her parents or friends. It was unguarded, raw, and laced with a venom that shocked him to his core. He froze, standing in the shadows of the hallway, a silent eavesdropper on the autopsy of his own marriage. "I just can't believe he was this stupid, Chloe," Isabella said, her voice a sharp, incredulous whisper. "All this time I thought he was brilliant, a genius architect. It turns out he was just a glorified artist with no business sense. Dad was right all along." There was a pause as Chloe presumably responded. Julian's heart began to beat a slow, heavy drum against his ribs. "Love him?" Isabella laughed. It was a sound he had never heard before, not her bright, social laugh, but a hollow, ugly bark of derision. "Oh, please, don't be so naive. I love the life. I love the name he was building, the doors it opened. I love the fact that I didn't have to ask Dad for money. Was I fond of him? I suppose. He was kind, predictable, like a comfortable old chair. But love? The kind that survives this kind of disaster? God, no." Each word was a physical blow. A comfortable old chair. The man who had cherished her, who had seen her as his partner in a great adventure, was nothing more than a piece of furniture to her. He leaned his head against the cool wall of the hallway, his eyes closed, the architectural plans of his life crumbling into dust around him. "So what are you going to do?" Chloe's voice was a faint, tinny sound from the phone speaker, but Julian could imagine her expression, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. "What do you think I'm going to do?" Isabella snapped. "I'm not going down with this ship. I've already spoken to Daddy's lawyer. He says I can probably get the house. It's our marital home after all. And half of whatever is left, which is probably nothing. The point is, I need to detach myself from his failure as quickly and as publicly as possible. I'll stay for another week or two, for appearances. Play the part of the supportive wife. Then I'll file. I'll be the tragic victim of his incompetence." Julian's breath caught in his throat. She wasn't just leaving him. She was planning to plunder the ruins, to take the very home he had designed and built for them, and to publicly brand him a failure to salvage her own social standing. It was a level of cold, calculated cruelty he could never have imagined. "But what about him?" Chloe asked, a note of what might have been faint concern in her voice. "He loves you, Izzy. This will destroy him." "Oh, he'll be destroyed anyway," Isabella said, and this was the part that broke him. This was the phrase that would be seared into his memory forever. "He's too gentle, too decent. He thinks the world is like one of his buildings, all clean lines and noble intentions. He doesn't understand how things really work. He'll be fine. He'll probably go design some low-income housing somewhere and feel noble about it. Honestly, it's probably for the best. I was getting so tired of pretending to be interested in structural integrity." She laughed again, and Chloe joined in, a weaker, more hesitant echo. They were laughing at him, at his passion, his kindness, his decency. The very qualities he had believed were the foundation of his character were, to them, a joke, a weakness. In that moment, something inside Julian shifted permanently. The pain, the raw, bleeding wound of betrayal did not disappear. Instead, it crystallized. It hardened into a core of pure, cold resolve. The test was over. The results were in. more conclusive and damning than he could have ever feared. He was no longer a husband trying to understand his wife. He was an architect who had discovered a fatal, cancerous rot in the heart of his creation. And there was only one thing to do when a structure was irredeemably compromised. You tear it down to the foundations. He pushed himself off the wall and walked silently back into his office, closing the door with a soft, definitive click. He sat down at his desk, the email to his lawyer still open on the screen. He deleted the tentative, questioning draft he had been writing. He took a deep breath, the scent of old books in paper filling his lungs, a scent of order and logic. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his words no longer cautious or questioning, but precise, direct, and utterly final. He was no longer designing a test. He was drafting a demolition order. The gentle, decent man Isabella had so casually dismissed was gone. In his place was a strategist, a man who understood structure better than anyone, and who was about to demonstrate, with devastating clarity, what happened when you mistook a load-bearing pillar for a decorative flourish. The days following the phone call were a study in quiet deception. Julian, armed with the devastating knowledge of Isabella's betrayal, transformed his performance of a defeated man into a masterpiece of emotional camouflage. He became more withdrawn, more seemingly broken than ever before. He would sit for hours, staring out the window, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. He spoke in monosyllables, his shoulders slumped, the very picture of a man crushed by the weight of his own failure. He was giving Isabella exactly the version of himself she expected to see, the weak, gentle man she had described to her sister. This act served a dual purpose. It lulled her into a false sense of security and superiority, and it gave him the space he needed to execute his own plans with methodical, uninterrupted precision. Isabella, meanwhile, blossomed in the role of the long-suffering martyr. With Julian receding into the background as a gray, silent fixture in their home, she took center stage. She hosted friends for support, tearfully recounting the tragedy of their downfall, accepting their sympathy with a practiced, sorrowful grace. She spoke of Julian with a kind of pitying fondness now, the way one might speak of a beloved but simple-minded pet that had to be put down. "He's just not coping," she would say, shaking her head sadly. "The shock has completely broken him. I'm so worried." Behind this facade of concern, she was brutally efficient. Julian, from the quiet of his office, watched her. He saw the subtle signs of her true intentions. She began quietly packing away her most valuable personal items. Not clothes, but smaller, more precious things. Jewelry, first edition books, a small, authenticated painting he had bought her for their 5th anniversary. She was siphoning the value from the house, preparing for her exit. She had meetings with a woman he didn't recognize, who he later identified through a discreet online search as one of the city's most aggressive divorce attorneys. While Isabella was planning her escape from the sinking ship, Julian was quietly revealing that the ship wasn't sinking at all. It was a submarine, and he was the only one at the controls. His days were a flurry of silent, intense activity. The emails to his legal team became encrypted conference calls. He spoke with his wealth management advisors in Zurich. He transferred colossal sums of money between accounts, structuring his assets in a way that would make them an impenetrable fortress. On his desk, next to his architectural models, lay a new set of blueprints, not for a building, but for the complete disassembly of his life with Isabella and the public reconstruction of his true identity. He methodically gathered his evidence. He made a secure, time-stamped copy of the audio from the nursery camera in the hallway, which had inadvertently recorded Isabella's entire phone call with Chloe. The irony was bitter. A device installed to watch over a future child had instead captured the death of his marriage. He compiled a detailed financial history showing his consistent, sole funding of their lifestyle, including every mortgage payment on the house she now planned to claim. He even hired a private investigator to do a background check on Marcus Thorne's business dealings, a move prompted by a long-held suspicion. The investigator uncovered a series of questionable land deals and shell corporations that bordered on illegal. Julian had no intention of using this information for blackmail, not directly. It was simply another structural element in his new design, a failsafe. It was leverage, a counterweight to the power Marcus thought he held. 1 week after the phone call, all the pieces were in place. The trap was set. Julian knew Isabella was planning to leave the next day. Her lawyer had likely advised her to establish a new residence to strengthen her case. He watched her that evening as she moved through the house, a restless, triumphant energy about her. She thought she was on the eve of her liberation. She had no idea she was walking toward a final, unappealable judgment. He decided the confrontation would happen in the living room, the primary stage for their curated life. It was a room of soaring ceilings and glass walls, a space designed to showcase success and transparency. Tonight, it would serve as a courtroom. He waited until she had finished her final packing, until her condescension was at its peak. She came downstairs, dressed not in her usual loungewear, but in a sharp, elegant dress, as if for a business meeting. She was holding a packed designer suitcase. "Julian," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion except a cold finality. "I'm going to stay with my parents for a while. I think we both need some space." "Space," Julian repeated, his voice quiet. He stood up from his armchair, the book he'd been pretending to read falling to the floor. He didn't bend to pick it up. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, the mask of the broken man was gone. His eyes were clear, steady, and held a glint of something she had never seen before: power. Isabella felt a flicker of unease. This was not the defeated man she had been managing. "Yes, space," she said, her voice a little sharper. "I can't stay here, Julian. I can't watch you just give up. I need to be somewhere I can think, somewhere I can plan my next steps." "Your next steps," Julian said, taking a slow step towards her. "Yes, let's talk about those. You've already spoken to Catherine Vance, haven't you? One of the best divorce lawyers in the city, very aggressive, specializes in securing primary marital assets for her clients." Isabella's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Julian continued, his voice still unnervingly calm. "You've been planning your next steps for quite some time, long before my bankruptcy." He began to walk slowly around the room, his hands clasped behind his back, a professor about to deliver a lecture. "You were getting tired, weren't you? Tired of pretending to be interested in structural integrity. You felt I was an underperforming asset. You were just waiting for the right time to divest." He was using her own words. The blood drained from Isabella's face as the implication of his knowledge hit her. How could you know that?" "This house has excellent acoustics," Julian said simply, "especially the hallway outside my office." He stopped in front of the glass wall, looking out at their reflection in the darkened pane. His, calm and resolute. Hers, shocked and horrified. The reversal had begun. The quiet man she had dismissed was finally speaking, and she was beginning to understand that his words were not pleas, but judgments. The foundation of her carefully constructed narrative was beginning to crack, and she could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet. The full, devastating weight of the truth did not land all at once. Julian delivered it piece by piece, with the precision of an architect dismantling a condemned building. He let each revelation settle, allowing Isabella to absorb the full impact before he proceeded to the next. "You think this house is your primary marital asset, don't you?" Julian said, turning away from the glass to face her directly. His voice was not angry, but carried the weight of absolute authority. "You believe your lawyer will secure it for you, the poor, abandoned wife left in the lurch by her incompetent husband?" Isabella, flustered and cornered, fell back on arrogance. "It's our home, Julian. I have a right to it." "No," Julian said. The word was simple, flat, and final. You don't. You have a right to what is legally defined as marital property. This house is not marital property. It was never marital property. He walked over to a discreetly built-in cabinet, a piece of custom millwork he had designed himself. He pressed a hidden catch, and a panel slid open, revealing a small biometric safe. He placed his thumb on the scanner. It clicked open. From inside, he removed a slim, leather-bound portfolio. This house, he continued, opening the portfolio on the large marble coffee table, along with the cars, the art collection, and the property in Aspen you were so worried about selling, were all purchased by and are legally owned by the Peregrine Trust, a private family trust I established 3 years ago, before we were even married. He slid a document across the table towards her. It was the deed to the house. The owner was clearly listed, the Peregrine Trust. Isabella stared at the paper, her mind refusing to process the information. A trust? What are you talking about? We bought this house together. No, Isabella, Julian corrected her gently. I bought this house. You decorated it. There is a significant legal and financial distinction. He let that sink in. The trust's sole trustee and beneficiary, he added, his voice dropping slightly, is me. You are not named in the trust documents. You never were. The color was completely gone from her face now. She was ghostly white. But my father's lawyers, he said, your father's lawyers gave you advice based on the false assumption that we were a normal married couple sharing our assets. That assumption was incorrect. He paused, then delivered the next blow. Just as your assumption that I am bankrupt is incorrect. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, innocuous USB drive he had been carrying for weeks. He walked over to the large, wall-mounted smart television, a piece of technology Isabella had insisted on for her movie nights, and inserted the drive into a side port. I haven't been entirely honest with you, Isabella, he said, turning back to her. It's true that my architectural firm, Vantage Point Designs, is being dissolved, but that's because it's no longer necessary. On the screen behind him, a document appeared. It was a high-resolution scan of a contract. The names were clear: Arch Innovate Solutions, LLC, and a large international tech conglomerate. And at the bottom, the final sale price, $150 million. Isabella's eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in a dawning, sickening horror. She looked from the screen to Julian, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. Arch Innovate was my side project for the last 7 years, Julian explained calmly. The software I was developing. I sold it 2 years ago. We have been living off a small fraction of the interest ever since. I kept the firm running mostly because I love the work, and because, I suppose I wanted to see if the man was enough, without the mountain of money behind him. He looked directly at her, his gaze unflinching. Apparently, he was not. As if on cue, the doorbell chimed. The sound echoed through the silent, cavernous room. Isabella jumped. Julian, however, remained perfectly still. That will be for me, he said. He walked to the door and opened it. Standing on the doorstep was a distinguished, gray-haired man in a beautifully tailored suit. It was Arthur Vance, a legendary figure in international finance and Julian's mentor from his university days. Julian, Arthur said, his voice warm but businesslike. Good evening. I hope I'm not interrupting. Is the car ready? We have an early flight to Zurich to finalize the details of the new foundation. Right on time, Arthur, Julian said. Please, come in for a moment. Arthur stepped inside, his eyes taking in the scene, the portfolio on the table, the contract on the screen, Isabella standing frozen in the middle of the room, her suitcase a monument to her failed plans. He nodded slightly, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Mrs. Thorne, Arthur said with a polite but cool inclination of his head. He had never liked her, a fact Julian had always politely ignored. I trust you're well. The arrival of Arthur, The undeniable proof of this other, powerful world Julian inhabited was the final, crushing blow. This wasn't a lie or a trick. It was real. The man she had dismissed as a failure, a comfortable old chair, was an international player on his way to Zurich, and she had just told him she was leaving him for being poor. The sheer, monumental, catastrophic scale of her miscalculation washed over her. The humiliation she had planned for him had boomeranged with the force of a hurricane, and she was standing at its epicenter. The silence that followed Arthur's arrival was profound, a vacuum where Isabella's entire world used to be. The confidence, the arrogance, the carefully constructed superiority, it all evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a raw, trembling panic. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted from the contract on the television screen to Arthur's impeccably tailored suit, and finally to Julian's calm, unreadable face. The intricate web of lies and assumptions she had been living in had been torn away, exposing the terrifying reality of her situation. "Julian, she stammered, the words catching in her throat. The performance was over. There was no script for this. "I don't understand. 150 million? Why wouldn't you tell me?" "Why?" Julian's voice was soft, but it cut through the room like a shard of glass. "Because I had a suspicion, Isabella. A suspicion that the love you professed was conditional. A suspicion that the always you promised me on that balcony in Como had a price tag attached. I needed to know if I was a husband or a provider, a partner or an asset. So I created a fiction. I created a stress test, to use an architectural term. I wanted to see if the structure of our marriage could withstand a little pressure." He paused, his gaze hardening. It failed. It failed spectacularly. Desperation began to set in. Her mind, racing to find a foothold, a way to spin this, landed on her last resort, her ultimate safety net. Her father. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unlock it. "I'm calling my father," she said, her voice a thin, reedy threat. "He'll sort this out. His lawyers will—" "I don't think you want to do that," Julian interrupted, his tone shifting from cold to glacial. "Please, feel free to call him. In fact, put him on speaker. There's something he should probably hear as well." Confused but defiant, Isabella stabbed at the screen and made the call. It rang twice before Marcus's booming, impatient voice answered. "Isabella, what is it? I'm in the middle of something." "Daddy," she cried, the tears coming now, real tears of fear and panic. "It's Julian. He lied. He's not bankrupt. He has money, a lot of money, and he's trying to throw me out." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What are you talking about? Put him on the phone." Julian took a step closer, his voice clear and steady for the speakerphone to pick up. "Good evening, Marcus. I'm afraid Isabella is a little distressed. She's just discovered that her assumptions about my financial situation and her legal position were entirely incorrect." "What is this nonsense, Julian?" Marcus blustered. "Whatever games you're playing, they're over. My lawyers will bury you." "Your lawyers are welcome to try," Julian said calmly. "But before you give them the order, you might want to consider this." He took out his own phone, tapped the screen, and a voice filled the room. Isabella's voice, clear as a bell, from the recording he had saved. "Love him? Oh, please, don't be so naive. I love the life. He was kind, predictable, like a comfortable old chair." The silence on the other end of the phone was absolute. In the living room, Isabella let out a choked sob and sank onto the edge of a sofa, her face buried in her hands. Julian let the recording play for another 30 seconds, including the part about her plan to take the house and publicly ruin him. Then he stopped it. "As you can hear, Marcus," Julian continued, "Isabella has been planning to leave me for some time, with the intent to claim assets that were never hers. This recording would be of great interest to any judge presiding over a divorce case. It effectively nullifies any claims she might have to spousal support beyond the bare legal minimum, as it demonstrates clear intent to defraud. "You bastard," Marcus whispered, his voice a venomous hiss. "Perhaps," Julian replied, "but I'm not finished. During this unpleasantness, I had some concerns about protecting my assets from external claims. So I had my team do a little due diligence on potential adversaries. Your company, for instance." He paused. "Tell me, Marcus, how are things going with the Northwood development project? My sources tell me there were some irregularities with the zoning permits. Something about a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands that made a very generous donation to a certain city councilman's charity fund. It would be a shame if that information found its way to the district attorney's office or the press." The threat was no longer veiled. It was a clean, perfectly executed checkmate. He had taken Isabella's queen and her father's king in 2 moves. The bluster and arrogance drained from Marcus's voice, replaced by a strangled, sputtering rage. He knew he was trapped. Any legal attack on Julian would result in his own ruin. "What do you want, Julian?" Marcus finally asked, his voice tight with fury and fear. "Want?" Julian looked over at his wife, who was now weeping uncontrollably, a broken figure amidst the splendor she had so coveted. He felt a pang, not of pity, but of a deep, profound sadness for the man he used to be, the man who had loved her. "I want my life back, the one I built, the one she was so eager to tear down." He turned his attention back to the phone. "This is what will happen. Isabella will leave this house tonight with 1 suitcase of her personal effects. She will sign a divorce settlement agreement prepared by my lawyers, in which she will waive all claims to any of my assets, in exchange for a one-time, non-negotiable severance payment of $50,000. If she or you contest it in any way, the recording of her conversation will be filed as evidence in court, and the information about your business dealings will be anonymously forwarded to the relevant authorities. Is that clear?" The only response was the sound of Marcus's ragged breathing. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice a dead monotone. "It's clear," and the line went dead. Julian put his phone away. Arthur, who had been watching the entire exchange with a quiet, impassive expression, finally spoke. "Well done, Julian. A difficult business, but cleanly executed." Julian nodded, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He looked at Isabella. "The car service I called for you is 5 minutes away," he said, his voice flat. "It will take you to any hotel in the city you choose. Your suitcase is by the door. I believe we have nothing more to say to each other." The demolition was complete. The ground was clear. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal formalities and profound, deafening silence. Isabella, stripped of her power, her status, and her illusions, complied with every one of Julian's terms. She signed the divorce papers in her lawyer's office, a ghost of the glittering woman she had once been. The one-time payment of $50,000, a sum she would have once spent on a single shopping trip, was transferred to her account. She moved into a small, generic apartment rented by her parents, a sterile box that was a universe away from the curated perfection of the home she had lost. The social fallout was swift and brutal. In the world she inhabited, failure was a contagion, and proximity to it was social suicide. The story that circulated, a carefully leaked and vague narrative, was that Julian's finances had recovered in a surprising and dramatic fashion, and that Isabella had, for reasons unknown, been left with nothing. Her friends, the ones who had offered their tearful support when she was the tragic heroine, now avoided her calls. Invitations stopped arriving. She was no longer a player, she was a cautionary tale, a ghost at the feast she had once hosted. Marcus Thorne, checkmated and humiliated, retreated. The threat of exposure was enough to ensure his silence and compliance. His own empire, built on a foundation less stable than he projected, was now vulnerable. He was forced to quietly liquidate several assets to cover the questionable dealings Julian had uncovered. a process that cost him millions, and more importantly, his aura of invincibility. The dynamic between him and his daughter shifted too. He no longer saw her as a precious asset, but as the cause of a near-catastrophic business disaster. The support he provided was grudging, his affection replaced with a simmering resentment. One afternoon, about a month after the confrontation, Julian received an unexpected email. It was from Chloe, Isabella's sister. The subject line simply read, "I'm sorry." The message was brief and surprisingly direct. "Julian, I know there is nothing I can say that can change what happened. I am writing this without Isabella's knowledge. I wanted to tell you that I am ashamed of my part in that conversation. I was weak, and I went along with something that was cruel and wrong. There's no excuse for it. You were always a good man, and you deserved better than my family. I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I don't expect a reply. Chloe." Julian read the email several times. It was the only flicker of genuine remorse he had seen from anyone in Isabella's orbit. He thought about the laughter he had overheard on the phone, the casual cruelty of it. Chloe had been an enabler, a willing audience to Isabella's venom, but her apology, unsolicited and expecting nothing in return, felt like a small, tentative step towards integrity. He considered replying, then decided against it. Forgiveness was a complex architecture he wasn't ready to design yet, but he didn't delete the email. He filed it away, a single salvage beam from the wreckage. Julian, for his part, did not revel in his victory. There was no triumph, only a vast, hollow space where his marriage had been. He had won, but the cost had been the last of his innocence. He sold the house, unable to live amidst the ghosts of his past life. The clean, minimalist lines he had once loved now felt cold and sterile. He instructed the movers to pack up everything, selling the art and furniture, and donating the proceeds to a charity that built homes for the displaced. He kept only his books, his architectural tools, and a few personal items. He began the work he had discussed with Arthur, establishing a charitable foundation dedicated to funding innovative, sustainable urban design projects. The work was meaningful, a way to build something new and positive from the ruins of his personal life. He traveled, meeting with architects and city planners, immersing himself in the language of creation and growth. He was building again, not with steel and glass, but with purpose and capital. One day, several months later, he was walking through a park in a city he had never visited before. He saw a couple on a bench, an elderly man and woman, sitting in comfortable silence, her head resting on his shoulder. They weren't speaking, just watching the world go by, their hands intertwined. There was a quiet solidity to them, a structure built over a lifetime of shared storms and sunny days. In that simple, unremarkable moment, Julian felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had lost a fortune in illusions, but he had gained a priceless, unshakable understanding of true worth. He had learned the difference between a beautiful facade and a strong foundation. And he knew that the next structure he built in his life, whether a building or a relationship, would be designed from the foundation up, with honesty as its cornerstone and integrity as its load-bearing walls. A year passed, a year of quiet rebuilding, not of a financial empire, but of a life. Julian had settled in a new city, a place with mountains on the horizon and a vibrant, creative energy that felt like a deep, cleansing breath. He lived in a penthouse apartment, but it was nothing like the cavernous showpiece he had shared with Isabella. This space was warm, filled with books, rough-hewn wood, and soft textiles. It was a home, not a statement. The glass walls didn't overlook a glittering, competitive skyline, but a vast, calming expanse of ocean and sky. His foundation had become a significant force in the world of architecture, funding projects that were both beautiful and socially conscious. Libraries in underserved communities, green housing solutions, public parks designed to foster connection. He found a deep, quiet satisfaction in the work. It was the purest form of his passion, untainted by the need for status or applause. He was building a legacy, not of wealth, but of worth. He rarely thought of Isabella or her family anymore. They had become figures in a past chapter, a case study in structural failure. He had heard through the legal grapevine that her life had continued its downward spiral. The $50,000 had been spent quickly. Her attempts to re-enter the social world she had once commanded were met with polite dismissals. Without Julian's success to reflect upon her, her own light had dimmed to nothing. She was, he heard, working as a gallery assistant, a job her mother had arranged, a pale imitation of the life of art and culture she had once lorded over. It was a poetic justice he felt no satisfaction in, only a distant, clinical sense of cause and effect. One crisp autumn evening, Julian was hosting a small gathering in his apartment. It wasn't a party, but a dinner for the board of his foundation and the architects of their latest project. The atmosphere was convivial, the conversation alive with ideas and laughter. Among the guests was a woman named Elena, a landscape architect whose work he had long admired. She had a quick smile, intelligent eyes that seemed to see the world in terms of light and shadow, and a calm, centered presence that he found himself drawn to. They fell into a conversation near the window, looking out at the twilight painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. She spoke of her belief that a space could heal, that the right combination of nature and design could bring peace to a troubled mind. She spoke of integrity, not just in materials, but in purpose. She was speaking his language, the one he had almost forgotten he knew. "Your home is beautiful," she said, looking around. "It feels honest." The word struck him. Honest. It was the highest compliment she could have paid him. "Thank you," he said, a genuine smile reaching his eyes. "I designed it to be a place with nothing to hide." In that moment, he realized the last of the bitterness had finally left him. The pain of Isabella's betrayal had been a long, cold winter. But standing here, in this new life, with this new person, he could feel the first, tentative warmth of spring. He had not become cruel or vindictive. He had not let the corrosion of their lies eat away at his own foundation. He had held on to his integrity, his decency, the very qualities Isabella had mocked, and they had proven to be not weaknesses, but his greatest strengths. They were the steel framework that had allowed him to withstand the collapse and rebuild, stronger and more authentic than before. The true test had not been Isabella's loyalty. The true test had been his own character in the face of her disloyalty. He had faced the void of betrayal and had chosen not to fall into it, but to build a bridge over it. True wealth, he now understood with absolute clarity, was not the number in your bank account, but the unshakable strength of your own moral architecture. It was the ability to look at your reflection, not in a darkened glass wall of a mansion, but in the clear eyes of another person, and see someone with nothing to hide. The story of Julian and Isabella is a painful one, but it carries a powerful lesson about the nature of trust and the true meaning of value. It reminds us that what people are in the light of prosperity can be vastly different from who they are in the shadow of adversity. Julian's journey from frustration to vindication, and finally to a quiet, earned wisdom, is a testament to the power of patience and integrity. We all face moments that test the foundations of our lives and our relationships. What do you think? Was Julian's test justified, or did he go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice, redemption, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Thank you for being here with me today. Until next time, be well, and remember to build your life on solid ground.